Right, okay. I'll see if I can do it as good this time. Yeah, hi everyone. It's a great pleasure to have been invited to speak here at the conference. I'm a big admirer of climate healers, so it really is good to be here. The title of my talk is Animal Liberation Front, and of course I'm probably best known for being one of the founders of the ALF. But in fact, I'm going to talk really about quite a lot more than that, as you'll find out as I go on. Now, the Animal Liberation Front was actually founded in 1973. At the time, and for the first 3 years, it's actually known as the Band of Mercy, and the name changed to the Animal Liberation Front in 1976. And there were 6 of us founded it, and the idea originally was to take direct action against hunting, to go to the hunt headquarters and cause some damage. Really, at the time, it was quite a small amount of damage to their vehicles to stop them actually going out hunting later the same day. These actions were usually carried out in the early hours of the morning. But very soon, we decided that we'd expand our activities really to all forms of the oppression of other animals, and we took action against the vivisection industry, against the fur trade, against slaughterhouses. We caused damage to animal research laboratories, to places where animals were bred, for supply, for research, against places that sold fur. Against various aspects of the meat industry, and so on, and caused a considerable amount of damage to these places. But we also directly rescued many thousands of animals, because the ALF started in the UK, but it very rapidly spread around the world. It was a very simple idea that people could take up, and so it really spread everywhere, and actually was like very active for about 30 years, and there were considerable gains made for other animals by ALF activities. For instance, here in the UK, the number of experiments on animals fell really quite considerably, I believe, as a result of ALF activities, and the fur trade really shrank. In a number of outlets selling fur became greatly diminished because of the pressure that we put on the fur industry. There was a big price to pay for this, of course, by the activists. There were hundreds of ALF activists were sent to prison, including myself. I served 3 prison sentences and spent a total of about 9 years in prison for ALF actions. And the state here in the UK, and I think it was the same throughout the world, became increasingly, I suppose, repressive against the ALF. The sentences imposed on activists became greater and greater. New laws were brought in. The police formed special squads, to investigate and arrest activists, and all that, I think, together with a big increase in surveillance, especially in the UK. There's been a big increase in surveillance, closed circuit television, stuff like that, and security measures. And I think all that, and plus some, probably some other factors as well, contributed to the not to the end of the ALF, because it still continues in a very small way, but very much to the to ALF actions becoming far less frequent. Now, I said that you've spoken about the achievements of the Animal Liberation Front, especially here in the UK, in terms of the fur trade and animal experimentation. but really, the ALF could never achieve what its name said. It could never achieve animal liberation. And the reason for that was because ALF activities were directly aimed at the companies that oppressed other animals. The public, ordinary people, weren't in the equation at all, and there was no real attempts to educate ordinary people. And that was where that was where the ALF, as I said, could never achieve animal liberation, because we'll never achieve animal liberation while the vast majority of people don't believe in it. We'll never achieve animal liberation while the vast majority of people are speciesist and while they're human supremacist. So the way we achieve animal liberation, in my view now, isn't so much through direct action, but through education. And that education needs to be vegan education, because veganism isn't just a diet. Veganism is a philosophy of animal liberation. Veganism is a philosophy that's opposed to speciesism and to human supremacism. And so what we need in order to achieve animal liberation is vegan education. And vegan education won't just achieve animal liberation, it will create a better world for all of us. I mean, if you look, for instance, at the climate crisis, in my view, the fundamental cause of the climate crisis is speciesism. Because if you look at the two main drivers of the climate crisis, we've got animal agriculture and we've got the burning of fossil fuels. Now, animal agriculture, I mean, according to a very good report by climate healers that you all know about, I'm sure, animal agriculture, 87% responsible for global heating. And then if we also look at the fishing industry, that bears more responsibility for global heating than all of aviation. You know, we're quite frequently told about how much aviation contributes to global heating, but in fact, the fishing industry contributes even more in various ways. And so, and the driver of that, the driver of animal agriculture and the fishing industry, the reason why those things go on is speciesism, because people have a supremacist attitude to other animals and feel that it's fine to use those animals for food, when of course there's no necessity at all for us to do so. Now, coming to the second driver of the climate crisis, burning of fossil fuels. Well, that in the main dates back to the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century. And of course, at the time when all this, burning of fossil fuels began with the Industrial Revolution, people weren't to know that would be a major cause of the climate crisis. They didn't know that. But what they did know was that the Industrial Revolution was causing the destruction of nature, was causing the destruction of habitat that animals lived in through pollution, through direct destruction in all sorts of ways. But basically, at the time, humans didn't care. They didn't care about that because they were living in a speciesist society where humans were felt to be superior to other animals, and where it didn't matter that other animals were oppressed if it was felt that humans gained from that. And so speciesism, I believe, is also a major driver of the contribution that fossil fuels have played in creating global heating and in creating the climate crisis. And we've got to remember as well that the main victims of the climate crisis aren't humans, although, of course, humans are becoming increasingly the victims of the climate crisis, especially in the global south. but it's actually not humans who are the main victims. It's other animals. Other animals are the main victims of a human created situation. You only have to look at the reports that the fires in Australia, for instance, that are attributed to global heating. It's estimated that those fires killed 3 billion other animals. 3 billion are horrendous, and that's only a tiny percentage of the animals that are suffering and dying right now as a result of the climate crisis. So it's absolutely vital that we educate as many people as possible to become vegan. And that's not just in terms of the behavior of people as consumers. Obviously, if people cease consuming animal products, and it happens in a big way, that can have a really big impact. But it's not just about that. It's also about the behavior of people politically. Because if people, are opposed to species, opposed to human supremacists, and people are vegan, and we get, the more of those type of people we get, the more of those people will become politicians, and we'll have more of those people to vote for those politicians. So eventually, we can actually change the fundamental nature of the administrations throughout the world, and we can have governments who will actually, will actually seek to bring animal agriculture to an end, to end the fishing industry, to properly tackle the climate crisis, and to end the oppression and persecution of other animals all across the board. And that doesn't mean that we have to educate everyone to become vegan. I think the figure that we need to aim for is probably about 25%. The reason I say that is if we look at governments throughout the world, they're by no means elected by a majority of the population. We look here at the last election here in the UK. The government was elected by less than 30% of people eligible to vote, and they won the election by a large majority. So we're probably looking about turning 25% of people to become vegan. Now that's not everyone, but it's still a really, really big figure. And how do we achieve that? Well, we achieve that through a huge amount of vegan outreach. We need a massive increase in vegan outreach, and I think it's great that so many more people are vegan than I think ever was the case. But what I feel sad about is that so few of those vegans are actually active in spreading the vegan message. The number of vegan activists is very small compared with the number of vegans, and we need to change that. Far more vegans need to become active in spreading the vegan message if we're going to achieve animal liberation. And so we need to encourage vegans everywhere to become active in vegan outreach, and there's a lot that people can do just on their own. For instance, leaving leaflets promoting veganism in public places, leaving them on public transport, putting them inside relevant books in the library, delivering them to people's homes in those countries where people are able to do that. And all that is, all those things are something that someone can do just as an individual. And even better than that, what individual vegans can do is to get together with other vegans in their own local area and to spread the vegan message through information stalls, for instance, in the street or at community events. Because one thing that kind of seems to be the case really throughout the world is that most vegan outreach in the physical world takes place in the center of big cities. There are things happening like the Cube of Truth, I think there's other things experience. There's a group called We the Free, and the work they do is great. You know, they're doing great vegan outreach, but it tends to take place in the centre of big cities. But really, we need vegan outreach everywhere, not in the centre, just in the centre of large cities, but in the suburbs of those cities, in smaller cities, in towns, even in villages. We need vegan outreach everywhere, and so as well as vegans thinking about what they can do themselves to promote the vegan message, there's I'd also say to those vegan activists that are going into the centre of big cities to do their activism, to also think about what they can do locally in the areas where they live, whether they can get together with other vegans to become instigators of outreach in the areas where they live, so that vegan outreach spreads everywhere. Because I believe if we have enough vegan education frequently enough in enough places, that we can eventually achieve animal liberation. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Now, I hope I've left plenty of time for questions, and hopefully, there'll be a few people ask me some questions.
Well, thank you so much for that. What was the motivation, or what was the trigger that made you change the way you're looking at animal liberation?
Well, I think it was gradual. What happened was when I was released from prison from last sentence, which was in 1992, I'd received like a 10-year sentence in 1996, and I'd served 6 years and 8 months of that, and I was released from prison in 1982, and I knew that in 1992. And I knew the authorities were keeping a close watch on me, and I thought, well, I can't really carry on with that sort of action. And I kind of thought, well, what else can I do? And I had some friends who were doing some stalls in the street, information stalls, and I thought, well, that's something I could do. So I went along with them, and I kind of learned how to do it. And then then I started doing it myself. And it sort of dawned on me then that this was a really important and vital way of creating change, is through educating other people. And I as time has gone on, I've kind of more and more believed in that, and also my experience in looking at what has happened where people have been engaged in direct action, and where people have been engaged in protest campaigns, that certainly what's happened here in the UK is in most cases, when those campaigns have started to become successful, the government stepped in and brought in legislation or brought in measures to stop those campaigns. We had a campaign over here against a very well-known campaign called SHAC, which is Stop Hunted Animal Cruelty, and it was against a particular laboratory, animal research laboratory, and the campaign against that was very successful, and this laboratory came right to the edge of closing down. But then the government stepped in and gave support to the laboratory. It's called Huntington Life Sciences, and it ended up with a lot of the campaigners being sent to prison, with new laws being brought in, and that company, that laboratory, although the name's changed, it still survives today. And so that kind of, it made me think that unless we change the nature of the administration, we're never going to get very far, because as soon as we start getting anywhere, if we have an administration that is pro the oppression of other animals, if they're fundamentally speciesist, they're always, whenever we start becoming successful with anything, they're going to step in and stop it. And so we're the ones that have to be in control. We vegans are the ones that have to be in control. And so how do we do that? And we only do that by creating a lot more vegans, because, as I said in my talk, that's how you get more vegan politicians and more people to vote for those politicians. And in a way, the kind of animal rights movement has never thought like that. We've always banged our head against a brick wall. We've always been demanding change from people that are highly resistant to change. And I think we're seeing that now. We're seeing that now with kind of, the move, the kind of climate movements. Certainly here in the UK, as a result of the disruption caused by climate activists, the government has brought in even more repressive legislation against protest. So instead of doing what the climate activists are asking, because this, the government here, they're kind of, they're going even more and more into fossil fuels. They're not doing anything about animal agriculture, for instance, and instead, they're bringing in this repressive legislation against protest. And so once again, that has really confirmed my view that we have to change the nature of the administration, and you only do that through changing ordinary people.
Another question before there are a lot of questions in the chat now, but another question before I pose those to you is, what gave you the start in animal liberation? How did you start?
Well, the history of my kind of history, how I got into it was kind of through my sister's first boyfriend, who later became my sister's boyfriend, who later became her first husband. This was way back when I was 18 years old. He was vegetarian, and I was very curious about this. I was an absolutely huge meat eater. I was probably the biggest meat eater in the world. But I kind of I did care about other animals, and I just didn't make the connection, between that and consuming animal products. And I asked him why he was vegetarian, and he said, "Well, we don't need to eat other animals to survive, so we shouldn't." And he was a really good athlete. He was very, very fit, and that made me really think about it. And I kind of agonized for about 3 nights trying to find an excuse to carry on eating meat, and I couldn't. So I became vegetarian, and of course I didn't know, and I don't think he knew either, about what happened, in the dairy industry and the egg industry, And so I was only a vegetarian, and then it was 2.5 years later I picked up a copy of the Vegetarian Society's magazine. It was in a health food shop, and there was an article in there about veganism, and I was horrified because I wasn't aware of what happened to the cows and calves and the hens and the chicks and all that. And so I thought, right, I've got to become vegan. I've got to do that. And there are also articles in there about other forms of the oppression of other animals, such as animal experimentation and the fur trade and hunting. And I thought, well, I've got to do something about this as well. It's all far more than I thought. And so I contacted the Vegan Society. I very quickly became vegan, and I saw an item on the television about the hunt saboteurs, so I got involved in hunt saboteurs, and it kind of all went from there.
Wonderful. Bram, would you like to ask your question?
Okay, I had a question, Hugh, about the speciesism, and it's sort of close to racism, and I think we can handle now the fact of between different races. But as Shailesh has pointed out, also the animals are also part of our human family. So we have to how do we extend it so people realize that animals are similar as us, that they're not that different from us, that they have the same feelings and the same. How can we get that out to the people, that they accept that?
I think we do that through vegan outreach, because that really is part of vegan outreach, or is part of what vegan outreach should be. And I think if we can spread that message to enough people, things will change. Because of course, these forms of repression are all related. Speciesism, racism, and sexism. They're all prejudiced against an oppression of others, because those others are perceived as being different. And so when they're not different, these are all, we're talking about all beings that are conscious, beings that have feelings, etc. And so I think it's through vegan outreach that we get that message out.
Alison? You're muted, Alison.
Hey, I clicked on mute and it didn't work. Hey, Ronnie, nice to see you this morning, or this afternoon, as the case may be. I am addressed by your willingness to go through not just one time in prison, but 3 times in prison. And I'm very interested to know what that was like for you, what you did while you were in prison, what you ate while you were in prison, how your time in prison maybe changed you, how you used your time. I don't know why, but somehow I identify with that experience that you had. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes, it was. I did try to make the best of it. I mean, first of all, the vegan diet was a problem when I first first went into prison, which would have been in was kind of 1974. I spent a short time in prison in 1974, and then a longer time between 75 and 76, and when I went in there and said I was a vegan, they said, well, first of all, they asked me what that was. They didn't know what it was. And when I explained to them what it was, they said, oh no, we don't cater for that. You'll have to eat what you can from the vegetarian diet, because they supplied people with a vegetarian diet, and they supplied people with diets that were, if people were Muslim or they were Jewish, they'd supply them with the relevant diet. But they kind of didn't recognize vegans. And so what I did was I went on hunger strike and said, I'm going to go on hunger strike till they give me a proper diet. And it seems rather strange going on a hunger strike to get to get food, kind of thing. But it works, because after 10 days, the prison officers that was in charge of the kitchen, he came to see me and sat down and said, right, we've decided to give you a vegan diet, and I need to work it out with you. What we can give you. So that's what happened, and so that was successful. But it kind of only applied to me. It was as I went through, because I was at several different prisons on that sentence, and each prison gave me the vegan diet. But that kind of only applied to me. It wouldn't have applied to any other vegans that went to prison. And so what happened eventually was that the Vegan Society started campaigning for vegan prisoners to be given a vegan diet, because by now there are a lot more ALF activists being sent to prison, and most of those vegan, for instance. And so the Vegan Society succeeded in getting the vegan diet recognised. But at the time, and this came in at the time of I think it was at the time of my 3rd sentence. What they said was that if providing a prisoner was a member of the Vegan Society and had a membership card to prove it, they could get a vegan diet. You see, so what happened was that because because the vegan diet, because the quality of the food on the vegan diet was a lot better than the ordinary food in prison, because it was kind of cooked in small quantities. And you also got a kind of goodie bag as well, with kind of soy milk in it, and peanuts and peanut butter and yeast extract and different things like that. What happened was that a lot of kind of ordinary prisoners who weren't actually vegan joined the vegan society, because they wanted better food and they wanted this goodie bag, because what they could then do was swap some of the items in the goodie bag for tobacco, because tobacco is the currency in prison. And so you got like a lot of, you had like a lot of kind of ordinary criminals becoming, well, not becoming vegan, but joining the vegan society, so get the vegan diet. And I often joke that at the time, the vegan society was the biggest criminal organization in the world, because the number of criminals that joined to get the vegan diet. But that's not the case now. What they've done now is, if they just accepted now, because another organization began campaigning along the same lines, it was called the Vegan Prisoner Support Group. And they kind of took the work of the Vegan Society even further. And so I think the situation now is that that when someone goes into prison, they only have to say they're a vegan and they get a vegan diet. They don't have to produce a membership card or anything. So regarding the food, after I kind of went through the hunger strike and that, I had vegan food all the way through, and it was okay. It was nutritionally adequate, and some of the meals were really good. So I never really had any complaint about the food. And what I kind of did to pass my time, I did a lot of reading on my sort of earlier sentences. On the last sentence I had, which was the longest one, I started studying languages so I could communicate with those people in other countries, those animal rights activists in other countries that didn't know English. So that's what I did. And so most of the time I spent on education and kind of learning about different things. So I tried to kind of spend the time productively in there, and to try and in writing letters, because you are allowed to write letters from prison and receive letters. I mean, it is restricted. You can't write as many as you want. There is a restriction. But in my letters, I tried to encourage people in their activism and in their campaigning for other animals. Although I had to be careful, I couldn't encourage anyone to do anything illegal, because the letters often get read, and that would have made the situation for me. So that's that. And also I kind of kept myself fit, because when I went into prison it was in 1986 on the long sentence. I wasn't particularly fit. I was a smoker. I didn't smoke a lot, but I was a smoker. I didn't get much exercise. As I said, I wasn't very fit. So I decided I'd get myself fit, because I thought, well, they're giving me a 10-year sentence, and if I get myself fit, I can, and I end up living longer, then I can get some of those years back. You see, so that was what spurred me on. So I gave up smoking, and I started to kind of, I cut out sugar, for instance, a lot of sugar from my diet and stuff, and kind of, lost weight and got fit. And I do some sort of exercise every day in the prison. There were times when I was able to go for a run, in the prison grounds, and I would do that, or I played badminton a lot and stuff like that to get fit. So I tried to approach it all as positively as I could.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that, because it seems like it was a large portion of your life as a vegan, especially. And you've given me food for thought about what vegan prisoners in the US go through, and I have no idea what it's like. So yeah, thank you for sharing that very personal aspect of your life. I really appreciate it.
BJ?
Thank you. And thank you, Ronnie Lee. I think one of the things that ALF does is it inspires people. I mean, when you take action strong enough to go to jail, that reminds us, you know, that we will do anything to save those animals, but really not anything, you know, not go to jail. So it helps us a little bit more, so, or some people do, I did, I was inspired by Wayne and DXE. And so I wanted to ask you about, I don't know if you talk about any particular groups, but how Wayne involves people and then involves the general group when he goes to court. And I wonder if that's in your strategy of education, of what you think about that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think direct action can be a very important tool of education, and the ALF didn't use it in that way, and that was like a failing of the ALF, really, that we weren't interested in education. We were just interested in causing, damage to places that oppressed animals to put them out of business. And of course, there is a limitation on that because, of course, the government's going to step in and it's going to put a stop to it, as they did. But I think direct action really is better used as a tool of education, and it kind of can be. And I, for instance, open rescue, as Wayne and his comrades do, that's that can be a very good form of awareness raising, and we have groups over here in the UK that do something similar. There's a group called DXE does exist over here, but in a really small way. There's a group over here called Meet the Victims, who go into sort of occupy farms and to get publicity. They don't very often get arrested. The police tend to not arrest them. And then we have a group over here called Animal Rising, who were formerly Animal Rebellion, and they've taken direct action where they've rescued animals and they've occupied farms and that kind of thing. But what they do, and what's very, very significant and different from the ALF, is they don't try to avoid arrest. In fact, they'll give themselves up to the authorities. And I think that's very powerful when someone says, well, look, I've done this. I'm not hiding the fact that I've done this. Here I am. Here I am. I'm not, I'm not scared to kind of, to stand up and say what I've done. I think that's very powerful in terms of education, and much more powerful than when people just hide and try to run away. But I think it's very important, though, and this is a problem that I have with Animal Rising, and I also have with DXE and what Wayne says, and that is, I think that the messaging that comes out of those actions should promote veganism. And with both Animal Rising and I think probably also with DXE, it doesn't, because I know Wayne's written stuff where he said that what we should be doing is rescue rather than promoting veganism. And I kind of don't agree with that. I think the rescue should be done to promote veganism, because it's a very, very strong way of spreading the vegan message. And I think it's a great shame that, for instance, here in the UK, when Animal Rising take action, and previously when they were Animal Rebellion and they took action, as part of their messaging, they didn't say that something very important that an ordinary people could do is to go vegan. And I think it was a great shame they didn't take the opportunity to say that. And I think, to me, how I'd like to see direct action and open rescues is as a form of vegan education, and that would be very inspiring, because that in itself would get a lot of publicity and make a lot of people aware. But also it would inspire other vegans to get involved in vegan education, because the message the message from those groups for the vegans is, okay, look, the best way to support us, all right, we understand that, you may not be able to take these actions where you could be arrested and possibly go to jail. But how you can support us is by doing vegan outreach, getting involved in outreach. So they could be like, I suppose, like the spearhead of the vegan outreach movement. And they're kind of not really doing that at the moment. And I think that's a pity.
Absolutely agree. Willow, did you want to ask your question directly, or should I read it from the chat? So Willow asked, tell us about some of the actions, protests by ALF, how actions and protests are changing today from the 70s and 80s.
Oh, how are they changing?
Yes.
I mean, direct actions had to change in a big way. For instance, I can only speak about the UK, but it's probably the same elsewhere as well in the world. For various reasons, because of because of the activities of the police, the activities of the state, where they brought in new laws to combat people taking direct action, where they brought in like special police squads to investigate and arrest ALF activists, and other activists taking direct action, for to protect animals, and I think also there's kind of been a change in the culture, kind of relating to young people that back in the back in the 70s and 80s, for instance, young people were kind of more prepared to undertake that sort of action than they are now for some reason. So there's and also a really big thing over here is the closed circuit television surveillance. I mean, there are cameras on the roads that can they can read the cameras on the roads that can read read number plates, for instance, and track people. And so really because the idea of the ALF, because the ALF's actions were really quite serious in terms of criminality. Nobody hung around to be arrested. The idea was to get away, and often it was, the most planning for an action went into how to get away rather than how to do the action, because that was really important. Well, you can't really do that now. You can't really do that. You can't really avoid arrest for these things now. So that means that the nature of direct action has to change. And so what's happened is that it's taken a form where the kind of the criminality, the seriousness of what people are doing in terms of the law isn't so great. And so if people are arrested, the sort of sentence they're faced with are much smaller. And so people are, people aren't now concerned about being arrested. They're not trying to avoid arrest. In many cases, they're actually giving themselves up, as part of the, as part of the whole thing. As I've said, that's very powerful. And so, the nature of direct action, has changed. In terms of like ordinary protest, I don't think that really kind of has changed. And we're seeing the same sort of protests, where people are going outside animal research laboratories, banners and placards, or they're going outside of the few places now that sell fur over here and protesting. That's kind of, that's sort of very much the same as it's always been. But it's the direct action that's had to change a great deal.
Yeah. Well, another question I had for you is, I've been talking about changing the system. So, because you have a system that's based on concentrating power in fewer and fewer. And we know that power, it's not their fault. It systematically corrupts you. You're sort of stuck as you go up the ladder. Right?
Yeah. It's a question of how you change that, because this kind of, I think there's a sense that, that there is a saying, oh, power corrupts people, but I think it might be more that people corrupt power. In other words, what happens is that people with genuine good intentions tend to shy away from gaining positions of power because they think, oh, that's a corrupt system, I don't want to be part of it. And of course, the problem with that is that allows the kind of the people that want to oppress animals and indeed want to oppress other human beings, that allows them a free run to gain power, you see. And so I think it's just a question of like kind of how do we deal with that problem? How do we even kind of start to deal with it? And I kind of think that probably the best way to do it, I mean, certainly if, thinking just about, say, I mean, it is of course a global problem, but say thinking about the situation here in the UK, I think the only way that we can change it is to change the nature of the administration. If we can get, and that it all kind of comes down to individuals, because any system is made up of individuals. It's made up of the individuals that kind of come together to create that system. So I think unless we change people at an individual level, and the way, the mindset of individual people, then we're not going to change. They're not going to change the system. So that's why vegan outreach is so important, and that's why getting more vegans elected to the administration, whether that's in on local authorities or whether that's in the government, and then once we had a vegan-run administration, and that administration could start making changes to itself, almost to say, right, okay, how do we create a fair system? How do we create a more democratic system here? How do we decentralize power, for instance, and that kind of thing? So it's almost the idea that you take control of the state and then you dismantle it. And that's kind of I can't see any other way of doing it than that, to be honest. I can't see any other way of doing it. And then, of course, you're wanting that to happen everywhere. In every state that exists, you're wanting that to happen. Because I mean, I'd like to see a world without nation states. Nation states were created by violence, and I'd like to see one world and one people. And of course, we'd still need to have administrative areas. But I don't. I'd love to see the abolition of nation states.
Right. Absolutely. Any other questions for Ronnie? Okay, Wendy is asking, do any UK political parties have a program to defend animals?
Well, of the parliamentary parties, the Green Party's best. Their policies on animals are actually very good. They've got a policy of phasing out animal agriculture, for instance. They want a total ban on animal experiments, and of course, in terms of combating the climate crisis, which mainly affects other animals, that their policies are the best. The only problem is they give no priority to animals. In other words, although the policies are good, they give no priority to them, and you wouldn't really know they had those policies. When any of their representatives speak, they don't really speak about animals. When they produce election material, it doesn't really talk about other animals and on their policies. So they're still, they're still a kind of human supremacist party in that way. Although they got the policies, they don't give them any priority. But if more vegans were involved with them, that could change.
Right. So there is no equivalent to the Animal Party that's there in Netherlands.
Well, there is an animal welfare party who are very small. I think I know they've got one local councillor who campaigns really well for animals in her local area, but they're not really. I'm not really keen on the name Animal Welfare Party, because what we want is animal liberation and animal rights, right, rather than welfare. And something like a party for the animals, for instance, I prefer a name like that because that doesn't not about welfare. We haven't got anything of that equivalent, but of course, if we were to create more vegans in this country, and that could well happen, or we could get sufficient vegans to kind of get the Green Party, because really, when you think that the oppression of other animals should be top priority really for all political parties, because out of all the the suffering that goes on in the world, the slaughter that goes on in the world, that which humans do to other animals is far greater than anything else. It should be the number one priority, especially because of the contribution that makes to the climate crisis as well. That should be the first thing on the list of what they need to tackle, but it's not. It's like nowhere to be seen.
Nancy?
Thank you so much. I really want to applaud you and support you in your confirmation that vegan outreach is the way to go, and to urge people to listen to you in terms of handing out leaflets. I hand out leaflets. They're from PETA because I can get thousands, really hundreds of thousands of them in big boxes every month. And also I make a little film slip, and it has a list of all the common films we know, What the Health, The Game Changers, Cowspiracy, Seaspiracy, Dominion, and then all the YouTube videos by the doctors and the greatest speech you'll ever hear and all that. And you really accomplish two things. You're giving someone something to read, which they can read later, but you're also verbally saying, go vegan for your health, the animals, the planet, for starving people, for workers, whatever. And in addition to that, if you don't live in a city, I do it walking down when I jog in the morning or in the afternoon. I hand out maybe 25, 35 leaflets and film slips. And I have a vegan stand with that PETA sends you if you have a stand with the vegan starter kit. But also, I go on the subways and I go to each from car to car, make speeches, hand them out. And in addition, like everybody I speak to on the phone, whether it's an Apple computer technician or, my Spectrum, any fixing I need. Oh, thank you so much. And by the way, would you consider choosing a plant-based vegan way of living for your health, the animals, the planet? I'll list the films for them. It's just another 10, 15 minutes for me, because then I get some feedback. Oh yeah, my daughter this, or my aunt that, whatever. But to me, it's worth it, because these are people who live sometimes in India, sometimes in Philippines, and sometimes right in California. So I'm really so glad that you mentioned that, and encourage everybody. Like we're surrounded by 8 billion people, 8 million people, 8 billion people. Sorry, yeah. And so every day, we can reach 100.
I think that's excellent. I think it's about everyone thinking, how they can do the most they can to spread the vegan message. And there's kind of there's two ways we do that really in terms of our time. We can do that in our everyday life, as we're going about our everyday life, like you do when you jog and giving people leaflets and stuff like that. Like I do, I leave leaflets everywhere at public transport, public places, stuff like that, where you're going about your everyday life and just doing it. Then there's the other type of action where you have to take some time out, use some of your spare time, to spread the message. And we all have spare time. Some of us have more spare time than others, of course, but we all have spare time where we can do that. One thing that I do a lot of here in the UK is what we call door dropping, and that is delivering leaflets to people's homes through their letterboxes. Now, I know that's not possible in all countries. I don't think it's possible in the USA to do it that way, is it? Because of the mailboxes. I think they belong to the mail company or something, don't they? Or are you able to do that? I don't know.
Not in big buildings, no, but more rural and more suburban areas.
In parts of the USA, and that, you know, that can be very effective. And I know really quite a lot of people that become vegan because of that, because they've received a leaflet. Leaflets are still, I mean, everything's great. I mean, you know, the list of videos people watch, a lot of people become vegan through watching videos. That's important, but just the ordinary leaflet is still very powerful, and I'd urge people to make use of those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's the 100th monkey effect, right? So you have to keep giving them things until they say, okay, this looks like it's just becoming normal.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Right. Yeah, John Thompson of Sedona had said, you know, sometimes you have to pound things into people's heads.
Well, it's the advertising companies do that. If you see, you know, a particular product is advertised all the time in the commercial breaks, every commercial break with the same product, and you know, people will watch that same thing several times, and the advertisers know that. And plus, they'll advertise the same product on posters, they'll advertise it on social media, at the cinema, because the advertising interests, you know, that repetition has an effect, and they're investing millions, billions into that. So we need to kind of learn from that and know that, you know, it may take like 5-10 leaflets before someone changes, you know, that, and we need to be there to do that.
Question from Sarah. Are you coming to Los Angeles anytime this year?
I'm actually banned from the USA because
is that right? Okay.
But I've been to Los Angeles. Online. I think I took part online in the National Animal Rights Day, which I think was in Los Angeles during the lockdown. There was an online version that I took part in, so I'm able to speak to people online, you know, throughout the world. Although there are a few countries I'm not allowed to go to. Ray is asking, are you banned from Canada? I don't think I'm banned from Canada, though, but I kind of prefer not to fly, you know, because of you know, the impact of flying. So if I was to speak to someone in Canada, I'd rather do like that as we're doing now. And of course, we've got the benefit of this technology now, which is kind of, you know, really advantageous to the environment, isn't it? Where we don't have to travel and, you know, cause harm to the planet.
Yeah. Sarah is asking, do you believe we will get to a vegan world by 2026?
I think only if we have massively more outreach, and only if a lot more vegans become involved in outreach, because that's the fundamental problem. That kind of, if someone's vegan, like they're actually kind of genuinely vegan, which is for animal liberation, then, you know, that person will want animal liberation. They'll want to end the oppression of other animals, but kind of what they need to realize is that's not going to happen while so many other people aren't vegan. So in order to get that, we've got to educate those other people to become vegan. And really, whether or not, I think it's possible if we had a huge outreach effort throughout the world, I think it could be done by 2026, but without that, I don't think it could.